What's up everybody? I'm here next to my new downhill bike build that I built custom from the ground up, and I'm here to do a bike check, talk about all the parts and why I chose them. So let's get into it. Let's start with my frame and why I chose that. So this is a 2022 Specialized demo that I media blasted myself with walnut down to raw aluminum. There's no clear coat on this. I left it raw with no clear because I might end up getting it custom powder coated next year at some point. I'm not sure because I'm really liking the way it looks raw. It's really not that big of a deal without clear coat either. All I do is Scotch-Brite some steel wool, keep it clean when it gets dirty, and it's really not that hard to maintain, and it is always looking fresh rather than getting scuffs and stuff like normal paint does. The reason that I blasted it with walnut instead of using something like aircraft remover is because a few years ago, the EPA, I think it was, removed a harmful ingredient in paint strippers that you can buy at like Home Depot. So after reading a lot of reviews of the new stuff without that ingredient, everyone says that it just doesn't even work. So I watched some videos and it just looked like more of a pain than it was worth. So I spent a little bit of extra time standing, blasting it, and I think it was definitely worth it. I think I actually stood there for about 10 to 15 hours blasting it because this linkage has a bunch of hard to reach parts. So that may or may not be worth it to you, but it was worth it to me. So I'm stoked with how it turned out. Now I want to hit on why I actually chose a Specialized demo frame. When I was looking for a downhill bike, I wanted something that I would feel comfortable on. I didn't want something that was going to be outrageously long, like the common saw bikes. I've never ridden one, so I can't really vouch for that, but they're so long, and I just wanted something that I'd be comfortable on, and the geometry numbers of this are very, very similar to that of my Transition Patrol that I've been riding for the past little over a year now. And I'm super comfortable on that bike, so migrating over onto this bike, which has similar numbers, was very easy for me to do, and I was immediately comfortable on this bike. Another reason that I wanted the demo was because of the boost spacing. It's got a normal boost 12 by 148 spacing in the rear, which I wanted because that is the same thing that I have on my Patrol, which means that wheel set on my Patrol can be put onto this bike whenever I need it to be. So rather than having a whole extra set of spare downhill wheels specifically for this bike that I may or may not ever use, I can just take those wheels from my Patrol. I'll have that bike with me wherever I go already, so I'm already gonna have a spare set of wheels that can be used on this bike or vice versa. Big reason I wanted that bike had to be boost spacing. To be honest, I've never rode a super boost bike, but I've never felt like a normal boost bike has any flex in the chainstay or the rear triangle. So I'm more than happy with normal boost, and it makes my life a lot easier not having to have a whole spare set of wheels just for this bike. All right guys, I need to pop in right here real quick because I forgot to mention this in the video. Another big reason that I chose this frame over any other frames was because it's alloy. When I was looking for a downhill bike, I really didn't want anything carbon. The main reason is because I've broken carbon bikes before, and alloy really just gives me the confidence that the bike underneath me is gonna be strong and it's not gonna break, and by the chance that something does happen, a weld cracks or whatnot, hopefully Specialized would warranty that, but if not, I know some really good welders that could fix those welds. So having an alloy frame was another big thing I was looking for when buying a downhill bike. So wanted to pop in here and say that, so let's get back to the video. All right, moving on from the frame, we're gonna go with the shock because this actually came with the frame. I'm running the Öhlins TTX22 that came with this bike. Now this is what is now the older version. They just released a TTX 22.2, I think it's called. So this is the old version that's been out for a while now. I actually bought a Fox DHX2 for this initially because I was planning to use that, but I found out real quick when trying to install that it just was not gonna fit. If you guys have experience with Fox, you know that the high-speed rebound adjuster is down by that shock mount, that eyelet down there. On this bike, that actual mounting point has that like part of the linkage down there that it like has to go through, and it was making contact with that high-speed rebound adjuster before the hole would line up. It was a very, very close margin that I could have solved with an angle grinder if I wanted to, but I really didn't want to go that route on a brand new bike that I just spent a lot of money on. So I just left the Öhlins shock in there. I've actually never rode Öhlins before this, so I kind of wanted to give it a shot, and I'm happy for multiple reasons that I left it in there because, for one, the shock feels fine. Like, the time that I spent on it, the shock feels great. It's quiet, which I like that. One of the big goals with this bike was to keep it quiet. I'll talk about that here in a little bit, but and the gold matches all of my Saint parts that I've got on there, so I think it accents it really good. Not that that makes a really big difference, but visually, it just makes me happy. But back to that mounting thing, there are some riders out there that ride this bike that have a Fox DHX2 on it, and I'm not totally sure how they fit it. They either have some sort of custom link that they put in there, or maybe they took an angle grinder to it. I don't know. If anyone knows how people are fitting DHX2s in this bike, drop a comment, let me know, because I'm genuinely curious. One difference you'll notice from the thumbnail to now is the coil. So originally that came with the Öhlins 450 spring, which I'm still running, but Öhlins springs are yellow, and yellow looks horrible. It's like my least favorite color, so I did not want that on my bike. Quick fix that I originally did was plasti dipped it black, which looked really good, but I knew that how much that thing is moving, that plasti dip was just not gonna last. So that became apparent very quick after literally the first ride. It was already starting to peel, which I expected. So I had two choices. I could either find a new spring, which I was looking at the Cane Creek Vault, but they were not in stock anywhere, so that just wasn't an option anymore. So I thought, let's just blast that down to raw too, which is what I did, and that's how it's sitting on my bike right now. It is raw, but I obviously could not leave this one raw without clear coat, or else it would rust because it's a steel spring. So I used, I think it's called Diamond Clear finish. I bought it off of Amazon. It was pretty expensive, but it said that it was supposed to be pretty flexible and durable. So I thought it would be, if it worked, it would be the perfect thing for this coil. So that's what I did. I dipped it in there, took a while to dry, but I took it to Windrock immediately after, and it's holding up well, and it looks really good. It's not perfect if you look close, but looks really good, and I think the raw looks super dope. Everyone thinks it's a tie spring, but it's not. It's bare steel, just clear coated, and I think it looks super good. On the topic of the color of the shock matching my Saint stuff, whole group set on here is Saint. Saint cranks, Saint derailleur, Saint brakes, and I think that's it. Saint group set, really stoked with how that worked. I was actually considering SRAM, but nothing was in stock that I could find from my dealer, so we went with all Saint stuff. I didn't really have much of a preference, but I'm stoked with how it turned out. Saint brakes feel great, but they have that infamous finned pad rattle that I took care of by getting some Velcro, and I'll show you right now. I took Velcro, cut it out, and like lined it around the top of the caliper, but that wasn't quite enough to fix it because there was still on the inside of the caliper a little bit of play, a little bit of a redneck fix, but it worked. I took some electrical tape and literally just wrapped it around the fin until it was a tight enough tolerance inside the caliper that it wouldn't move. So it's just a quick fix for now. Once these pads are done, I am not getting finned pads anymore. I'm gonna get something else that just doesn't rattle and doesn't need weird quick fixes like that. But overall, I'm stoked with the brakes. They feel phenomenal, as everyone should expect from Saint brakes. Easy to bleed, easy to maintain, super happy with those. I paired the brakes with SRAM HS2 rotors. There's really no reason other than they're just a solid rotor. They look good, they work well, they seem to be pretty durable from what I've been able to tell so far. So yeah, that's what I'm running for my group set. Like I said earlier in the video, one of my biggest goals with this bike was to keep it as quiet as possible. Other than the hubs, I'll talk about that in a second, I wanted to keep this thing super quiet. I didn't want any cable rattle, I didn't want any chain slap. So what I did to manage that was, when I routed all the cables, Jaguar, and I'll pop it up on the screen right now, Jaguar makes a foam cable housing. If you build your bike from scratch, or if you take it apart a little bit, you can quiet it down by putting this housing over top of all of your internal cables. I went even further than that. I put it inside my down tube on the brake cable and shifter cable, but I also detached the chainstay and seat stay so that I could get inside the chainstay and put it over the cable in there too. Literally the only spot that doesn't have it is this little part of the brake line that goes about maybe 6 inches inside the chainstay. I don't hear any rattle from that, but so far the bike is quiet as far as cables go. This bike had a lot of chain slap before I put STFU on it. The first weekend I rode the bike, it hadn't been delivered yet. So I've got STFU on there now. So this bike is really just dead silent. If you heard the video that played at the beginning of this, going through the rocks and stuff like that. Literally all you hear is a little bit of hub and just tires in the dirt, which is what I really want from a bike. I want to be able to hear what my bike's doing, and when stuff is just rattling around, it makes me feel like my bike is clapped out. So brakes are silent, no chain slap, no cable rattle inside the bike, so I'm very happy with how the bike sounds. On the topic of sound, I mentioned hubs. I've got Factor hubs on this bike. I'm really stoked that Factor wanted to be a part of this build. I'm normally a big fan of just all black rims, spokes, and hubs, but Factor was a part of this build, and they asked me to not just get black, because if they're gonna be a part of this build, they wanted something to pop so that people know that they're not just random like black hubs, which I'm totally cool with. I get that. So I went with blue, not because I want my bike to look like Nico Mullally's framework spikes. I know it looks very similar, but blue accents all of the dials on the suspension. So we've got the clickers on the top that it matches. I think the Olin shock even has a clicker too that's blue. So I think that those just complement each other very well. I've got the gold complementing each other, got the blue complementing each other, and I just think it looks really clean, and I'm stoked with how the hubs sound and look. Very happy with those. Now those hubs are laced onto some new wheels. If you saw in the thumbnail in my original build post, I was running DT Swiss EX 471 wheels. I chose those wheels because they were readily available and in stock, and that's what the whole Specialized Gravity team runs. So I don't know for sure why they run those, but there's probably a reason. They're solid wheels. They would not run them on their downhill bikes if they weren't solid wheels. Another reason I ran them is because I tested CushCore again, and one of my theories inside my head, I don't know if it actually makes a huge difference or not, but this is just the way I was thinking. I was trying CushCore again, and normally people run 30mm internal width rims on most bikes nowadays, most downhill bikes and long travel enduro bikes. The EX 471s are a little skinnier. They're 25mm rim width. And I was testing CushCore again, and my theory was that the thinner the wheel was, the greater the thickness of the CushCore that it would impact, thus giving it hopefully more protection. But I don't know if that was the case or not. I haven't ran alloy wheels in 2 years because, at least 2 years actually, because I was denting them like crazy. It started when I started to ride downhill, like they would not make it through a weekend at a park. And back then I thought it was just me being a horrible rider picking terrible lines, which honestly still could be the case. I'm not making that argument that I'm perfect, but I decided, you know, there's a reason the Specialized guys run them. Everyone says they're supposed to be more compliant on off cambers and stuff like that. They're cheaper, so I could save some money. So I thought, you know, I'll give them a shot again on this bike. It's been a while since I've tried them. Maybe I'm picking better lines. Maybe that was the case. So I gave them a shot and immediately realized why I stopped riding them. They didn't feel bad, but first weekend at Snowshoe, dented a wheel. Rebuilt that wheel, went to Windrock, dented another wheel. So back-to-back weekends, literally within the same week, I had already been through the 2 rims that I originally bought for this bike. So I pulled the trigger on some carbon rims again. I wanted to keep it the same as what I have on my Patrol so they can be switched back and forth without being different wheels. So these are the E13 carbon downhill rims I've been using for the past 2 years, and some people love them, some people don't. I've actually got along very well with them. Been using them the past 2 years. I have broken a couple of them, or a few of them, but every time it's been 100% my fault for like just absolutely grenading a sharp edge on a rock, which I would expect any wheel to break under those circumstances. So going with E13 again, they've been very good to me. If you are doubting them or you're not sure, listen to this. I'll clip in a video right here of when I took the bike to Windrock. My buddy Dom actually had to borrow my Patrol because he actually broke a wheel too. So he borrowed my Patrol, which had these same wheels on it, and he, with no CushCore, and if you listen, he really put them to the test. So you heard in that video clip that Dom was hard on the wheels, multiple rim impacts with no CushCore, and they held up fine, no cracks, nothing, like honestly barely a loose spoke. So these wheels have treated me very well. I like the way they ride. And when they do break, one of the best things about them is that they tend to still hold air. They don't explode like some other carbon rims, so you can still, most of the time, finish your run even if you crack a wheel. Sometimes you don't even know that you crack it. So That covers drivetrain and wheels. While we're down here at the wheels, we're gonna talk about the rubber. I've got the Kenda Pinner Pros on this bike. Pinner Pros are great for like dry and hero dirt kind of conditions, which is kind of the season that we're in right now. If we get mud, I'll put some mud spikes on there, but right now the dirt tends to be pretty good. I'm running a gravity casing in the rear, trail casing in the front. I would run a gravity casing in the front, but with still lingering effects of the pandemic and supply chain issues, Kenda's running low on 29-inch gravity casing pinners, so I've got to run the trail up front for now, which honestly isn't a big deal for me. If anything, that gives it a little bit more compliance up there with a softer casing, which might be better on my hands. Moving on to the front of the bike, I'm rocking a Fox 40. I really don't think there's anything that quite looks as good as these, and they perform very well. They're proven on the World Cup circuit. Honestly, all suspension is pretty good nowadays. So I got Fox because, I mean, Fox 40s are just, they're the downhill fork that you think of when building a downhill bike. And I think the Kashima just looks so good. I know I'm talking a lot about stuff looking good, but you know, they're saying look good, feel good, ride good, and I think that is absolutely true sometimes. But yeah, I've been stoked with the performance of this fork. Now, the contact points of the cockpit, I'm running a Tidal cockpit. I've got the Tidal stem and the Tidal alloy bars. Not a fan of any carbon contact points, whether that's bars or cranks. Not a fan. I've seen both of them break too many times, and mentally, I just am not comfortable riding carbon bars or carbon cranks because, like I've said before, the thought of going through, for example, the Red Bull Ravine at Windrock and either cranks or bars exploding, that's a really bad crash that overall, I mean, it just could go wrong in so many ways. So I stay away from carbon contact points for that reason. Running the Tidal cockpit, it looks so good. That Tidal stuff looks so good. The packaging that it comes in too, I know that doesn't matter at all, but they take it one step further. Packaging comes in is very similar to what you get when you buy something at Apple. Very high quality, and it's supporting Brett Reeder, who is a rider in the industry. So I love to support people in the industry. This stuff looks good, feels good, really happy with that. Grips, running ODI long neck V 2.1 on all of my bikes. I switched over these grips, I think it was last year sometime after, I think it was Max Walker, I'll give you the credit on here. He was running them and told me to feel them, and I really like the feel of them. So I'm still running those. Up in the cockpit, I think it might be worth mentioning is my headset. I'm not running the stock headset that came in this bike. I got a Cane Creek 40 headset for it, which is super smooth and it's sealed really well. So long term, we'll see how it holds up, but right now I think it's gonna be good. Saddle and seat post, running the stock stuff that came with it. Thompson seat post, Specialized saddle, seem to be pretty solid. The Specialized seat is nothing special, but it's a downhill bike. You're not supposed to sit down. I'm running HT pedals on this. If you have been following the channel, I switched from Crank Brothers to HT at one point this year. I forget exactly when it was, but I've been super stoked on HT. I really think that these are gonna be the pedals that I use forever. They've got really good engagement, really good adjustment. They feel just, it's like exactly what I want in a pedal. These are the T2 Enduro pedals on this because when I built this bike, the new X3 downhill pedals were not in stock or available anywhere. So honestly, I might get the X3s for this, I might not. They use the same mechanism, but the X3 has a little bit of a larger platform, which my shoes don't even ever contact the platform. They're literally just like clipped into the mechanism. So I don't know if I really absolutely need the X3s, but the X3s do have that new plate that's on the front of the engagement to kind of help, I think, guide your foot into it. So maybe they're worth getting, maybe not. I don't really know. Chain guide and bash guard is the E13. I don't remember which one it is, but it's like their full one. I did have some issues with this because the top chain guide part is so long that there was like a clearance issue on my frame. When you cycle through the linkage, it would make contact. So it took me a lot of like fiddling with the spacing of everything to kind of get that to a point where it's not contacting my frame. Not that it really matters much on this frame because it's aluminum, but Angelica, one of the girls that I know that rides downhill, also used this chain guide bash guard combo on her V10, and her shop put it on and didn't really run the linkage through the full travel. and she didn't pay any attention to it either because it's not something everyone thinks of. But after a year of riding, it had worn through to her carbon on her chainstay, and she ended up having to get a new chainstay. So that's something to be aware of when putting bikes together like this. Is you got to make sure there's clearance for everything, because not everything is made specifically for each bike. So something to point out there. Back to the topic of wheels and tires. I'm actually not running Cushcore with these wheels or tires. Everyone kind of gives me shit for it all the time, but I really don't feel like Cushcore helps that much. I run such high pressures already that I don't need the sidewall support that Cushcore provides, because that's a big reason that people use it. But I never find myself actually rolling the casing of the tire because, like I said, I run higher pressures for rim protection purposes, because I find that running higher pressures actually provides me with more protection than running Cushcore at lower pressures. And I honestly, once you get to a high enough pressure, I don't feel like the contact point of the contact patch of the tire really has much of an effect on the grip. For example, I normally run like 27 PSI up front and like 30, 31 in the rear. At those pressures, once I get above, say like 26, the grip of the contact patch just feels similar across the board. I don't feel like it changes much as I add pressure. Now, an argument is that the compliance or the suspension that the tire PSI can provide does get stiffer, and I'll agree. But to me, having a little bit of added rim protection rather than a little bit of better grip in a, let's say, a straight line, because once I drop below 25 PSI, I start rolling the tires pretty bad. So it's not worth it for me. I would rather run a little bit higher pressure, get more rim protection, than have a little bit more compliance and potentially more grip from a contact patch. So that's my theory behind it. I've been fine with wheels. I smash these wheels all the time. Like, I make contact. You heard Dom earlier. I put these wheels through the ringer, and even at those high pressures with no Cushcore, I hit rim pretty often when going through rock gardens, and most of the time these rims hold up very well. So that's a big benefit to carbon rims, especially these ones. I really haven't tried any other ones like reserves, but these ones seem to be pretty damn strong. All right, guys, so that is a bike check of my new downhill bike build. I'm really stoked. It's the first bike that I've ever built from scratch. Hopefully you sat through this whole video and listened to me talk, listen to some of my theories that may or may not be true, but I'm stoked on this bike. I can't wait to spend a lot more time on it at downhill parks, do some races on it. I think I touched on all the parts that I put on this bike. If there's anything I forgot or that you want to know, drop a comment and let me know, and I'll address it in a further video. If I do like a long-term review on this bike, I will let you know. But for now, that's a wrap for my bike check, and we'll see you in the next video. Not sure what it's gonna be. Hopefully it's riding bikes somewhere, but you never know with the winter weather nowadays. So, peace.